LLM Workflow Engine is a Power CLI and workflow manager for large language models. I'm going to start by talking about some of the major components in the project, and then we'll dig into the shell and I'll show you around. So there are four major components. The first one is conversation management. And this is basically the same as you would get from something like the ChatGPT website. So you can start new conversations, you can revisit existing conversations and extend them, you can delete conversations, etc. In my opinion, if you like working from the command line, this is actually quite a nice daily driver if what you're trying to do is work with GPT-4 from the API. The next component is model configuration. And this allows you to configure large language models across different providers. So you can load up a model, you can customize the model attributes such as temperature, and then once you have the provider and model configured exactly the way you want, you can freeze that in what's called a preset and then be able to reload that quickly to be able to work with it. So you might have one preset that is lower temperature to do something like code generation and another preset with higher temperature to do something like creative writing. Then the next component is prompt templates. And prompt templates allow you to design and save new prompts in a reusable fashion. It's using Jinja under the hood, which is a very well established templating language for Python. And it also allows you to include and pass variables to prompts during execution, so that the templates themselves can be quite flexible. In addition to that, you can connect a template to a specific model configuration. So you might have one template that would do something like the code generation that I talked about previously, and another template for creative writing. And those can use different presets to have different types of output from the model configuration. Finally, there's workflows. And workflows allow you to design multi-step workflows using the YAML configuration language. Now, under the hood, this is using Ansible, which is a pretty well-known configuration management system for servers, but it also works quite well for doing linear workflows that involve large language models. The workflows allow you to take actions with large language models, but also take other outside actions and kind of weave them together. It also allows you to integrate prompt templates and the model configurations. And when you combine all that, it can be quite flexible and powerful. So I'm going to assume that that we can skip the installation portion. Really installing it is just visiting the documentation. You would install it via pip or via the source code, and then you would make sure you have your OpenAI API key configured, and then you can start using it. So we'll start assuming that those things have been done already. So you start the program with no arguments, and it's going to recognize that you don't have any data storage or users created, and you can just create a user with a username. That's really all you need, and right after that's done, it will allow you to install example configurations. I'm going to go ahead and do that because it'll give us something to work with right away. So now we're up and running. We've got some example configurations which I'll show you around for. But the first thing is it's nice to know how to get help. So you can just type help, and you can see there's quite a few commands that are built into it. If you want to get help on a specific command, like the configuration command, you can do that. That just shows you the different ways you can get help with the configuration. And this could be quite handy, so let me just show you the configuration because it's nice to be able to know how you're set up. There's a lot here. It's probably not worth going into in detail, but you've got the way your files are set up, and then you've got a very detailed configuration for how the booting is going to go with different options. And then finally, there's some runtime configuration, like where you're logging to and if it's streaming or not. In particular, the file configuration is quite handy because it tells you where everything is if you want to go in and actually edit the files directly. Okay, so let's have a look at conversation management. So to create a new conversation, you would use the new keyword. And then you just can type in your input, and you'll get output from the model. And this is a chat. So you're going to have a threaded conversation with whichever model that you're working with, and you can see that here. This is a little back and forth between me and I think this is GPT 3.5 Turbo. Yes. So. Let's create another conversation just to get a little history in here. There we go. Okay, so that's a conversation about bacon. And if you look here, you can see we're starting to develop some history. We've got two conversations going. Now you can switch conversations by using the switch command. So if I want to switch back to that older conversation, I can do that, having a look at it there, and then switching to the most recent conversation. The one about bacon is right there. So that's basically conversation management. Next up is the provider and model management. So let's start by having a look at what our current model is set to. So we're using the chat OpenAI provider and the GPT 3.5 Turbo model with a temperature of 0.7. That's kind of high for me. I think I might want to lower the temperature. Maybe we'll do something like code generation. So that you can do by doing this, model temperature 0. And now if we look at the model again, you can see we're using the same model and provider, but we've lowered the temperature. So once I have this set up the way I want it, I can actually freeze it in a preset. So let's do that by doing preset save, and we'll just call this Turbo 0. Okay, so that is now saved, and if I look at the presets, I can see that I've got my new preset there. And switching between them is quite easy. So if I want to, there's a default preset of just Turbo, so if I want to load that preset, I can do it this way. And if we look at the configuration, you'll see this is sort of the example configuration for Turbo, or we can load up the one we just created there. And if I look at that model configuration, you're going to see it has the 0 temperature that we set up. So that is basically configuring models and the attributes on the model, saving them in presets, and being able to switch. And now, if I want to use a provider other than the chat OpenAI, that's the only one that's currently installed, so we'll need to install another one. So let's have a look at the concept of plugins. So right now, you can see we've only got a couple plugins enabled. These are all just the ones built in. And there's only one provider plugin that's installed. So we're going to want to install another one if we want to work with other models. And let's install the plugin that works with the older OpenAI models. So that would be here, the OpenAI provider plugin. This allows you to work with GPT-3, etc. So I'm going to grab that installation. And so let's install that. And on this side, while it's installing, I'm going to go ahead and make the necessary configuration changes. So in order to enable a plugin, you have to configure it in the enabled key. So I will do that right now. That should be all set. If we go back over here, we can see that installed successfully. So if we go back now and look at the plugins, you'll see that the OpenAI provider plugin is installed. And to switch to that provider, I can use the provider command. And let's take the Text DaVinci 3 model. We'll make a new conversation real quick here. And now I'm actually communicating with Text DaVinci 3. So if I look in my history, you'll see I've got 3 conversations going. Since the database stores the model that a conversation was started with, you actually can see that the presets will switch when I switch to an older conversation. So here I'm on GPT 3.5 Turbo, and if I go back to that conversation that I just created, you'll see that I'm on Text DaVinci 3. So it does remember the model per conversation. Shell plugins allow you to write new commands that aren't in the core of LWE. So let's actually install one just to we can illustrate that. We'll install the actual shell plugin, which lets you run enter natural language commands, and it returns with the appropriate shell command. So we're going to go ahead and install that. And edit the configuration to add shell. And I think the package plugins you have to restart, so we'll do that. And if we look at our plugins, we've got the shell plugin now. So now if I say you'll see that it's going to respond to my natural language command with the actual command, and then it gives me the option to execute it, and there is my current working directory. So those are plugins. Again, you can right now there's plugins for the shell and shell commands, or you can add plugins for providers. Okay, next up is templates. So let's just have a look at what templates were installed in the examples. See, there's quite a few in there. And let's have a look at a few. So let's actually I'll show you a template first. Antonym's a good one. And this will give you kind of an idea of the breakdown. So up here in this top section is metadata, and the metadata allows you to do things like override things for that specific template. So here in this antonym template, you can see that the request overrides. This is going to be using the preset for Turbo, so we're going to be using GPT 3.5 Turbo when this template runs. Even if there's another model that's loaded up in the shell, when this template runs, it's going to use Turbo. You can override the system message, provide a description for the template. You can set a custom title that's going to be used, things like that. So the template itself here, you can see it's just text, and then anything in these double angle brackets here are variables, and variables allow you to dynamically substitute. Pretty straightforward. So this particular antonym generator is just a proof of concept. You can see it's using a very simple like chain of thought prompting to be able to generate an antonym. So let's run this template. And there's different ways you can run templates. There's different sort of strategies for running them. You can see here that you can open it in an editor and run it. You can prompt for variables and open it in an editor. You can just prompt for variables and then run it, etc. So we're going to use the prompt and run for antonym. And what you'll see is that it'll prompt for the variable that we need to fill. So I will enter that. And then you can see that what happens is it substitutes the variable that the value for the variable we put in. It feeds that into the LLM, and the LLM responds. Let's look at one more template. A little fancier. So this one actually will show you the built-in clipboard integration. So let's suppose we should have a look at it first. I'm going to show you the template for the code documentation. So let's suppose I want to I've got some code that I want to write some documentation for it. I'm going to have the language model do that. So just looking at it, you can see again, we're going to use these request overrides. I'm going to use a code generation preset. And here, it's going to allow me to enter the language that it's in. You'll see that in a second. And this clipboard variable, this special variable, it will automatically put whatever's in your clipboard into the template. So let's grab a piece of code here from the project itself. I'll just do this one right here. Just keep it simple. And if I run this template, I'll do the edit and run, prompt edit and run, so you can see everything. So prompt edit and run, and example code documentation. There we go. So I'm going to give it a syntax label of Python, and then you'll see that it substitutes that here. I get some nice syntax highlighting because I've got NeoVim configured properly for that, and it automatically pastes into from the clipboard what I had in the clipboard. And this is just a template I wrote up to be able to generate documentation for a function. So let's go ahead and run this thing. And as you can see, again, it's submitting it to the language model, and it's going to respond with the documentation. We can pretty that up a little bit by using the chat command. That re-renders everything with markdown format, so it just looks a little nicer. So you can see here, we've got the documentation that I requested. So that's basically how templates work. There's some more things you can do with the metadata and configuration, but that's in the documentation. So finally is workflows. And let's start by looking at the workflows that are available. So let's have a look at just one of them first. Just look at it so you can see what it looks like. We'll look at the question, feedback, answer one. Okay, so basically, an Ansible, as I had said before, this is using Ansible under the hood, and an Ansible playbook is basically just a YAML file. It's a very simple configuration language, and you can see here that what we're going to do is actually quite a very common back and forth workflow with the language model to be able to improve the accuracy of responses. So we're going to ask the LLM a question, and then it's going to we're going to feed that question and its answer back in and ask it to give critical feedback on that answer. And then we're going to feed all of it back in and say, based upon the feedback in your original answer to the question, give me a new answer that's improved. So this is a very good example of something you might do over and over again in ChatGPT on the ChatGPT website. But here you can actually automate it. So you only have to type in your question once and it'll do the work for you. So let's go ahead and run this workflow so you can see it in operation. So here's a question. How many moons in the solar system? Let's try that one. I can spell. There we go. So now the workflow is starting. I've got it set up so it's going to give us quite a bit of good feedback. So here's the first answer that it's giving, and now I resubmit that question and ask it to give critical feedback. It's saying it's provides the number of moons, but there's some things it could do better. And then I'm submitting all that and asking it to re-respond, and now you can see this answer has quite a bit more detail. Now let's do one more workflow. This one's going to be quite a bit more complicated. So I'll try to talk you through it. This particular workflow does persona generation. So basically what that means is, given a set of random characteristics, the model will write a description of a fake person for you. So let's see here. Let's actually just look at the high level of it. So I'm not going to show you every single piece of this workflow, but just on the high level. So basically, as I said, we're looking at a set of characteristics. It's picking random values, and then it's going to generate a persona. So just to make a little bit more sense of this, this is the JSON file that it's using to generate the traits. So you can see there's these different characteristics like age, socioeconomic status, etc. And for each one, there's multiple values that it can be selected. So what the workflow is going to do is it's going to loop through. So it's going to pull that JSON file down, get it into a usable format, and then here it's going to loop through, and each time we've got it set to 5, it's going to generate 5 personas, and each time it's going to pick random values for each of those characteristics, feed it to the LLM, and then it will respond with a written persona. So let's go ahead and run this. Okay. So let's skip back up here very quickly. So you can see that it pulled down the JSON file. And then here, it's looping through and picking random values for all the characteristics. There's quite a few. And then here, it has finally gotten the values. It puts them into a nice format, submits them to the LLM, and now the LLM is writing a persona for that. And so you can see here, based upon those, it wrote this persona. And it's going to do 5 of them. It's going to take a little bit, so let's just have a look at one of them. So so far, we've generated 1, and if we just have a look at it, you'll see that in the file, so the very last step here is it actually writes it out to a file so you have access to it. So these are the characteristics that were submitted for that persona, and here is the persona that GPT wrote for that particular set of characteristics. And what's nice about this particular automation is the characteristics are controlled by a JSON file, which you can adjust. You can control the number of iterations, so you could generate 5,000 of these, or 5 of them like we are now. And once you do those setups, you can just run it and it'll spit it out over time. And we finally generated the last persona. So if you look here, you can see we've got 5 personas now. That's really all I've got in terms of a high-level overview. The project is under active development on GitHub. Please feel free to submit feature requests or report any issues. And thanks for your time.